Good morning, everyone. How's it going? Happy Thursday. Man, this week has been flying by.
It took you a second.
Took me a second.
Right? I was doing the same mental
so
jump.
bad at
I was like,
I'm so bad at it.
Tuesday.
Tuesday.
Thursday.
Yeah, it is Thursday now. I literally had to look at my calendar. Happy Thursday. Really good topic today. Twitter and LinkedIn are kind of abuzz around the adoption and maturity levels, where you're at as an organization. So I think it's going to be a super cool topic. Any kind of openers or intros we should talk about? I have one that I'm just it's a very minor thing. Well, maybe not very minor.
Drop a bomb on us.
Not gonna drop a bomb on you. Surprise.
Yeah, this is the last podcast. No, just kidding.
Yeah, exactly. So, surprise note, I was working around Power BI the other day, and I wanted, this is like a PSA for me. So this is a PSA announcement for those who are using Power BI. If you are and this I think actually bodes very well with what's going on in what we're going to talk about today. If you're a smaller organization and you don't have a SharePoint license somewhere in your organization, you may have your Gen 1 Power BI workspaces SharePoint site removed because of licensing mismatches. So a little bit of background.
Yikes.
Yeah,
Oh
I know.
my gosh.
I brought
That
up
is a bomb.
that is a bomb. I just want
That is a
so
bomb.
the reason I bring that up is I just want people to be aware. I was just working with someone to fix this because it became a very hot issue. Luckily, we had OneDrive synced all their information from the SharePoint site to their local machine. So they had copies they were working on so the process yeah, I know. The process they were following was work on everything locally on my machine and then just allow OneDrive to sync with SharePoint, and then they had a production folder, and then from production folder, the PowerBI.com reports were being published. Luckily, there's only one workspace we were dealing with this on. And for whatever reason, Microsoft decided to come through and evaluate licensings on companies. And what happened was they had a pro license. When you create a Gen 1 workspace, you by default get a SharePoint site behind the scenes. It was a SharePoint security or SharePoint team group or whatever it was created. And because of that, they had by default been given a SharePoint site. And at some point, all of us, right? We didn't know. Like, it was what Microsoft did at the beginning. Microsoft came through, they evaluated licensing. They said, hey, you guys don't have licensing for a SharePoint site because all you have is Power BI Pro users, and no one had like an E3 or SharePoint or business professional license anywhere. And so they said, well, you don't have SharePoint, and then therefore they removed it. And so we were on a support ticket with Microsoft. We were calling around, and at the very end of the conversation with the support ticket, the Microsoft representative said, well, we think the root cause of the issue was you didn't have a SharePoint license anywhere in your organization, and therefore Microsoft decided to go through and realign its licensing. How they even give you a SharePoint site when you don't have licensing for it, I don't even know. But someone screwed up, and there was no notification sent. We didn't know what was going on. So 3 days ago, stuff was working. The next day, it's gone, and we don't know where to find it. So all that to say, the solution was to go out and get the cheapest user price license. I think it was like a $12 license or something like that, around getting a user that has a SharePoint and applying it to the Power BI Pro user that was using the SharePoint site. So now they're
created
able,
it,
and then it all came back.
No, it did not come back. It did not come back. We were able to make a new SharePoint site. We had to upgrade it from Gen 1 to Gen 2 and then relink another SharePoint site to it. So I'm just going to let you know that it was a headache. People were
run that through your channels there, Mike.
I'm running through the channels. I have let Microsoft know about this one, and potentially it could be a very large issue. So all to say is, if you are a smaller organization and you do not have a SharePoint license on any of your users, and you're using Microsoft Gen 1 workspaces, and you'll know you are because when you log into a Gen 1 workspace, it'll say, hey, we have upgraded the workspace experience. Please upgrade your workspace.
We're about to delete everything you have.
We're about to delete everything you have. And the funny thing was, when we upgraded the workspace, it had the old workspace linked location for the old SharePoint still referenced inside the Power BI. And the Microsoft tech support people were just befuddled. They were beside them. So like, how does that get there? How did that? Dude, I don't even know. I'm just telling you, this is what happened. And so PSA announcement.
People are coming in live right now going, what are they talking about?
What are they talking about?
Like, well, you got to go check out the podcast.
So this may be a very short episode for me then, because I may have to fly to Redmond just in case.
I think if you have a user that already has an access to a SharePoint, like if you have an E3 or an E5, like there's already some licensing that gives you SharePoint. So I don't think those are the concern. I think really it's these smaller organizations that just have 1 or 2 pro users and that's it. And the other caveat of this is you're 1 or 2 pro users and you have a license that is you made Power BI workspaces in Gen 1. So those are the only things I want to be aware of it. Let everyone know I ran into a problem with it. You might too. Just be aware.
Have they not read their own documentation on best practices in Power BI?
Dude, man.
This reminds me of the conversation of when workspaces first came out, and there was at a client, and the Office 365 admin came in. He was just fired up. You're not implementing this in my organization. We're like, what are you talking about, man? This is what it does. And I went back and ended up talking like, are we serious? Like, this is what's happening on the back end? And I'm like, yep.
Yeah, every time you create a workspace,
lots of hooks.
Every time you created a workspace, a new security group and a new SharePoint site was created when you created that workspace. And so there was a whole bunch of SharePoint stuff just arbitrarily created. And admins were like, all of a sudden, people were creating workspaces and they had hundreds, thousands of workspaces just created in bigger organizations. And it was not really indicated. Yeah, they loved it.
From all the sessions,
it's called viral adoption.
It's true statement. True statement.
We could do that in Power BI.
Anyways,
why does Power BI keep popping up every time I open my computer like a virus?
Awesome.
Oh man.
So with that, let's get into the real topic of today. This is one that's been near and dear on both Seth's and Tommy's heart, and I go along for the ride on this one. Not necessarily. I actually do. I do like talking about this one as well. Tommy, give us a run up here. What are we talking about? Adoption and maturity levels of your organization around Power BI.
So I'm actually going to defer to Seth on this because he's kind of been the champion on this. Yeah. So
Seth.
Okay. Yeah. So I think for a conversation today, right after the COE conversation, I think we collectively took a step back and decided to dive into more of the adoption framework. Right. There were a bunch of questions I think that came out of that conversation, not only in our minds, but that we received after the fact. So today we're going to start kind of go back to the beginning to discuss some of the basic adoption framework areas, and today specifically around maturity levels. So, I guess to frame today, hopefully we drive some more questions and potentially answer some, but overall discuss, what are, in my mind, kind of the two questions, that arose which is, how do I adopt the adoption framework? and then, and where am I, in the adoption framework, right? And so if I'm going to preface conversations around, where I think I want to head between us is, there's different answers depending on the size of the organization or teams, right? So I think a lot of the conversation around that today is like, what does that look like when we are saying, your maturity level is this, or, in order to start the process of building, a roadmap of adoption within an organization, where do we begin with that?
I like that. And I want to maybe start with a phrase here that comes out of the adoption framework notes, right?
Adoption roadmap.
What was that?
So Melissa actually just mentioned the live chat saying, hey, can we refer to this as the adoption roadmap moving forward?
Oh, heck yeah, we can.
So because the framework was the...
I was going to start arguing right away.
Oh, boy.
We'll call it whatever we want.
Yeah. You know what? Go ahead.
For clarity's sake.
Feel the wrath.
This is a good point, because we talk about the Power BI framework a lot, right?
Yes.
So adoption roadmap clicked in.
Okay,
good to go.
And this is something else we use a lot of, is this concept of what is the Power BI framework. Like, for example, I was having another conversation. People was like, hey, I want to add a custom font into my Power BI reports. I'm like, well, the Power BI framework does not allow for custom fonts to be added. They're like, well, I found these articles. I'm like, time out. You found them being added in desktop. The framework in PowerBI.com, where you're going to put all your reports, does not allow for this. There's other caveats that let you get there. So, the framework we're talking about, I think, is Power BI. The adoption roadmap, make sure I get that wording right. The adoption roadmap is it's a journey. It's a progression. I think that's one of the points that are going to come up here today very, very clearly. Here is there's not a right or wrong in here. there is Tommy's going to say yes or no. Yeah. I don't think there's a right or wrong. I think there's a lot of ways to get to the same answer depending on where your organization is. And I think in all cases, we can always look at where we're at on that road and look ahead to see where other people are at who've gotten further past where I am. And therefore, I can take one step further to get closer to whatever that desired direction is. So maybe I don't even think if it's a road. Maybe it's just a very large, flat plain, right? And I can look in the distance and I can see different people in different directions, and I can figure out which of these people most their process, their deliverables, their whatever that is, which one is most aligned with how I view the world, and how do I can get to that destination. So just take a step forward to be better than where it was.
So I think actually the instance of framework versus roadmap is a almost perfect example of the difficulty of moving, despite how the size of your company. As the great Jerry Seinfeld said, words have meaning, right?
Mm-hmm.
And what happens in anywhere you're trying to, wherever you are on this adoption roadmap and whatever level of maturity you're at, you can advance. And I can't tell you how many experiences I've had where the terminology and the definitions and because those words mean some understanding, some agreement, right? Whether it's Power BI, report, dashboard, KPI, or the internal wording of sales lead, sales rep, sales region. That all has to be, to me, like at the very basis, if you're going to increase. If we said roadmap or framework, of course we're like, well, they're saying more or less same thing. But what happens again is marketing says, it's the same thing. Sales says the same thing. And you have reports and you have inconsistency.
Yeah.
To me, if any, build a foundation. And I think that's, to me, if you're going to say wherever you are, is do you have a foundation? And I see it time and time again. Foundation starts with an understanding and an agreement on words and the terminology and how we define things.
I like that. I think that's good.
So in following along with that, right? I want to get on the same page as far as at least articulating what I read in when I look at the overview of the adoption roadmap, right? You have a lot of things in that initial chart where it's talking about like diagram, data culture, ownership, executive sponsor, kind of like, to me, like this is the definition of an organizational strategy for larger adoption of Power BI. Can we agree on that? Or is there ambiguity in there related to like maybe there's going to be differences as we pursue
depending
each of these
on the
different
size
levels
of the company? Or
and I think it does, right? And that's where I think right off the bat, when we look at this diagram,
yes,
right, this is where the questions start to arise in, is there a difference in the size of the organization and where I am at in terms of Power BI adoption, right? And I think this is where the conversation is going to go today, because I think a lot of this is, at least in my mind, starts to be clarified in that maturity level section, which is the next one.
So I'm going to say no, but the complexity is the thing that changes.
I'd agree with that one. I think you're going to have at some form all the nuggets that are here. These are like buckets to my opinion. Yep. All of these are buckets, and some of them will have a lot of information in them and a lot of process in them. And if you're a big company, or in small companies, you might have a couple of these that are filled up, and ones that are just not as much of an issue. Like if you're governing one workspace, that's different than you're governing 1,000 workspaces.
Right.
So your process can be a little bit more loosey goosey, I think, on that governance piece. But you still do governance, though. You're still like all these topics, I think, are relevant. It's just maybe the scale at which you pursue them is different.
The fact that how the organization impacts the user adoption, affect or impacts organizational adoption, like those things to me are consistent. I think even with regardless of the size of it, but I think how it plays out and the effectiveness of that is you have too many. You might have a lot more communication and you have to have a different strategy. You have to have a different plan of attack, because you can't communicate the same with a company of 500 compared to a company of 5,000.
Agreed. So interesting stuff.
And I agree.
I was gonna say,
I'm gonna respond to one thing here.
Yeah.
I'm gonna reserve the right to change my mind as we continue to work through the
Yeah.
adoption framework,
Sure.
because it relates to all of us having different experiences,
Mm-hmm.
and I think that complicates the conversation. So hopefully we find some clarity. But as we go along, I would also think that we're going to drive towards a maybe the conversation itself drives us towards that same verbiage, same ideas,
Yes.
same structure,
Yep.
and we're not just going to start off there.
Yeah, I think. Yeah. So a couple people are saying something in the chat window. This is a funny username. Work stuff. Work stuff says I'm making it up as I go along, and I thought that's actually really interesting. And I want to comment on that just purely because when Power BI
continue.
Okay, shocker. I want to comment on that because I feel so. This is my perspective generally on life. Right? We as humans, we don't understand what we have not experienced. Right? If I've never gone through a full Power BI adoption plan with a company, if I've never pushed a company through it, I don't know where the pitfalls are. I don't know where things are weak. I don't know what I need to do. And so this is the reason why I think this is really important, because Melissa Coates, and she helped substantially with a lot of this documentation. I went through her class. It's absolutely incredible. So by the way, Melissa, chat me on Teams or something and send me your link to your courses, or I'll go get it and put it in the chat window, because this is really, really important. You make it up as you go along unless you start listening to other people who have already been there. And so I think one of these things here about this topic is we have all experienced different probably versions of how adoption works in different organizations. We've seen it in different places. Melissa has also seen it. She works with companies to help them go through adoption and says, here's where I see pitfalls. Here's where you need to work harder at. This will be hard. This will be easy. And I think that information is extremely valuable. And what we're talking about is extremely relevant because we're talking about things people have already done. And these are like the topics that are bubbling to the top that feel like they are the most relevant to be successful. And with that, I'll drop into a comment here. In the article, page 1 overview, it says Power BI adoption, and I want to read this because I think it's a very well-written statement. Successful Power BI adoption involves making effective process, support, tools, and data available, and integrating that into regular ongoing patterns for content creators, consumers, and stakeholders of your organization. Now, to let that sink in, I think that does a very good job of defining what success is. That doesn't tell you, do these steps and you will be a success. It just tells you it's making an effective process, support, tools, and data for your organization. And I thought that's a very well-written statement that I think really encapsulates what we're going to talk more about today.
So I wonder... let me know if this is diverting a little, but to me, as I've been reading and just trying to consume these articles, especially the maturity side and my own experience right now in my organization, to me, I can't separate culture from maturity. I can't. And like, if you're going to increase your maturity, there's a culture that has to change at each stage. Whether it's the organizational solution or user, and whether you're at 100 or 500. But to me, there's some interconnectedness that I cannot separate them. So I'd be interested when Melissa knows, but I want to hear if you guys feel the same way on that.
I think you're skipping ahead.
Okay. There's a type of culture, but continue. So
the only reason I say that, right, is because after maturity levels in the adoption roadmap is data culture. Right. So we're going to talk about the specific areas.
I agree.
And I think that's where it's more relevant. And
okay.
I don't normally curb, but because we're on a trying to fact-finding mission of the adoption roadmap, let's just focus on the maturity and overall today.
I'll always contest for the next episode.
Maybe
that culture. So I'll say I will. Yeah. What?
That actually went over better than I thought.
Whew. Well, no,
was like, no, man, we're talking about it now.
No, I mean, I want to, but I agree for the sake of the episode kind of thing. But there's just too much, whether it's a bad culture or no culture, there's still some culture that has to be kind of evaluated at each point.
Absolutely. So. I completely agree with you. I think if I'm going to frame today's conversation, right? Like to
Mhm.
me, I think all of us to some degree, or at least me when I first saw this, I was like, man, wealth of information. You dive right into the overview, and it's like I see this diagram, and I'm like, we're gung ho. Let's talk about the COE. But it's almost to me like kind of like slow your roll.
Mhm.
Like where are you at first, right? And to me, it resonates with like the skills matrix kind of thing,
Yeah.
right? I can't tell you where to go until you know where you're at. And I think
Totally
that's
would
where we're
agree.
dialing in today,
Yeah.
which
Mhm.
is the maturity levels,
Yep.
right?
Okay.
So
Let's go
so
with
if we
that.
kind of shift into that
Yeah.
level, right? I think what is interesting to me, and I'd love your feedback, both of you, on this, is when I look at that diagram that has solution adoption, user adoption,
Mhm.
organizational adoption, right? To me, this is almost like a 6-step thing in my mind, right? Because you see these arrows, and if you dive into the description of things, and since Melissa's joining us live, if she wants to correct me at any time, she can.
We got the pressure.
Right? But this is like this defines for me some of the arguments that Mike, you and I had, I think, at least in my mind, right? A solution is the viral. It's the first part. I'm a team. I'm building something specific in terms of a report. Users are starting to adopt more of this, but it's not on an organizational level. Like it's in a business unit or it's in a smaller group that starts to proliferate throughout a company and show value. And as it's described, then the third step is pushing that viral adoption and the value that is coming from these organizational units to the highest level, where the organization itself says, no, we have like not a problem, but there is more value here for the organization as a whole, that we want to spin and focus more attention on Power BI as a solution, because we're going to save money or make money with it. And
Love that
then
phrase. I love that phrase.
and then it starts pushing down again. And I think this
Mhm.
is where you and I got into it, Mike, because I look at this, I look at the adoption roadmap and all of this from the organizational level. How do I
Right.
proliferate it throughout the organization? But this is where I'm saying, like, there's the fourth step in my mind of like the organization now needs to start pushing that information, supporting the wider user adoption to drive more solutions. And that's kind of like the way I read this diagram. And I'm interested in am I the only one? Or like how you guys
You're
are reading
almost
it.
talking like a point of origin. That's how I interpreted that. There's
But
like a
it isn't that what assessing where you are at in
yeah.
terms of Power BI within your organization is doing, though? Like
Yeah.
where are we in terms of like, can if I'm a solo show, right? And I
Mhm.
built some cool things in Power BI, or we have a few solutions, I'm not in a position to start a COE, because the COE is
Yeah.
an organizational body that has to come from the highest levels down to be supported. At
So
least that's the way I view it.
I don't see necessarily 6 steps. I see 3 steps and 3 outcomes of
Okay.
each. So the reason why is because I think with the 3, like if you're doing the organizational side, if you're beginning to push Power BI and provide this, some structure, and to me, I think it has to. I'm always the proponent of there has to be a centralized place where it starts from. Like obviously there are those organic, the Wild West where it does grow. Someone downloads Power BI, another person does, and then there's an adoption there. But to me, it doesn't work or doesn't necessarily change until it becomes somewhat centralized, or at least that's the easier path.
Centralized where?
I personally, whether it's on IT or a business team, there has to be some common ground for what the solution's going to do and provide. And I think whether it's documentation or a set of agreements on how this is going to be now become a functional team. Just like you're saying, like people can think of the Power BI analyst as someone who's just there for support and just builds reports, or and as Melissa kind of outlines, or it's a critical part. Like the analyst is valued, and that's what she says, which I highlighted that. Like it's someone who's just there for support. Like build me a report. to where that person in that role is valued. That path to me is there has to be some centralized part of agreement, whether everyone is on a different team or there's a centralized team. I'm a proponent that you make a team out of that, a BI team, a data team that works on all facets of the company. I think that works on a small scale where you maybe have 2 or 3 people for a smaller company, or on the wider scale. But I'll start there.
I like those. I don't think they're necessarily steps. I think these are just, in my opinion, how I read this one. Again, I really like these 3 different areas. So a couple of comments that are actually inside the text here around, solution adoption. So let's just define these couple buckets, right? Solution adoption is referring to the impact the business value has for an individual requirements or artifacts. And then it goes down to say below, this would be like an app or a workspace. So you've made an app or a workspace that's driving, that's a solution. You've made something that's valuable, and you're seeing regular use of that content, right? For me, my business, like I can speak directly to, like, I have a time card thing that I do in like Power Apps. I use it every day. It's a solution that drives usage of that thing. And so I have a Power BI report that summarizes all the data. That's like a daily, hourly level thing that I look at because it's impactful. It drives my decisions. It helps me track things. Then there's this next level of user adoption. And I think this is very important because you can have an organization adopt something, but if your users just push back and will not use it, it will not go anywhere. And you have to mandate it both ways. So I think there's another level here too, is like, I don't see it fighting each other. I see it as kind of hand in hand. So like, you have to, like, users have to adopt the solution with we have to, and this is where I use the analogy of, like, you have to remove their pain, right? Make something easier. People are lazy. I say that, Seth and I say this all the time. People are lazy and they want the path of least resistance. Matthew Roach was on one of our Power BI user groups, and he goes, "I am not your path of least resistance," which I thought was a hilarious quote, because people will come to him if you just answer them directly and give them the answer. You've just made it easier for them. So what's happening here is people want solutions that will make their life easier in general. And Absolutely. So I think when you can present solutions to people that are easier to get into, that are easier to work with, that are easier to kind of do your workflow, and that's where I feel like I have found a lot of, and this is maybe a very core, I might be talking very granular at this point, but like I have found on a user by user basis, when I show them Power BI or I show them Power Query, which and some of that I would lump together as the same really cool tools from the business side, just showing people and explaining them there is a better way to do this already makes their daily life easier, and that by its nature will drive adoption. There's a whole bunch of other things that go along with this, right? If we don't build process to how to govern things and move things through a pipeline to get things promoted and into the organization, if we don't make that process smooth or decide what it should be, you've now basically done the same thing. You've made it hard for people to use something, and they're not going to want to use it.
And let me build on that, Mike, and also go back.
Melissa agrees with me. You guys are both wrong.
All right. Thanks for subscribing, guys. Please like and comment.
Yeah, right. Yeah.
So, we're done.
I want to interject here, though, right? Okay. Because I want to clarify what I mean by the 6 steps, right? If like maybe that wasn't the best description. Like, take this diagram and split it in 2 and highlight one as viral adoption up through, like, making Power BI float up through the organization to a higher level where we're going to start making big decisions around the strategy and adoption of it.
Okay.
And then the second one is kind of this on the organizational level. Now that viral adoption has come up through teams, there's already, there's already people using it. There's successful solutions. There's whatever. Then there's this other part where I like spending, or I'm trying to clarify in my mind, which is, Mike, to your point, where I was in our previous conversation, people are lazy. So if I'm in that organizational adoption phase where I'm going to start building out these, COEs and practice and all this stuff to start widening the user base.
Yep. Sure.
That is where I'm saying we would need to have a whole bunch of ducks in a row, because people are lazy.
Yep.
And unless you make it easy for them,
correct,
they're not going to adopt.
Agree.
Right. So
100%.
That's where I think we'll probably spend more time in a next conversation, where, like, how do you make that successful? Like, how do you build something
Yeah.
out? What do you need that you can iterate on? Because I'm not saying waterfall the whole thing down, right? But you need to have something there where people feel extremely comfortable
Yes.
and they can go get their answers right away.
Agreed.
So I also have opinions about people. I'm just not going to say it. I can't say it on air. Um, but so I want to go back to the 6 steps and what I was saying, 3 steps, 3 outcomes. The reason I think I'm still for that is if you're doing like, let's say the 3 adoption steps right, you're going to have basically I think what you're considering 3 additional steps. I'm saying those 3 outcomes will be, if you're doing it correctly for your organization, not necessarily just the right way, but if it's working for your organization, those are going to happen almost naturally. Just like and the only way I can equate this is just like if I learn how to hit a ball 110 miles an hour off the bat, there's a good chance I'm going to get a hit. But I have to do the effort. If I am putting the right and the correct effort in, the other thing's going to fall not necessarily into place, but I will see that in a sense, that fruition or that adoption occurring for that, how it's impacting. Like if I have good organizational adoption and I am doing that correctly for my organization, for where we're at in our maturity, we are going to see user adoption beginning to grow.
I agree. If you're doing it
And
right,
the same, yeah,
you're going to see.
if you're doing it right, you're going to see the fruits or the
Yep.
or the weeds.
Yep, I definitely think, and I think there's also things to look for in your organization to let people know, like when is it adopting, right? I think there's also like, how do we know when things are growing? Because honestly, people are resistant to change. In every culture, no matter what you're doing, unless I can show you a better way, you will continually write. Again, to my point, you'll keep extracting data out of Excel, out of business objects, dumping it to an Excel sheet, and people will continue doing it inside Excel because that's what they know and they're comfortable with it. So in some cases, we're bringing a brand new thing to people that they are unfamiliar with and they are not comfortable with using initially. So we have to be, as we grow this up, and yeah, I 100% agree with you on that one. I think, Tommy, and I think what Miss Alyssa was trying to convey in this initial phase here, these 3 different sections: organizational adoption, user adoption, and solution adoption. All 3 of those are going to happen simultaneously, maybe at different levels, but these are the 3 topical areas of what you will find in your company, right?
Are they though?
Yes.
Because if you think about a lot of the user group interactions we've had with people, right? And what I'm trying to clarify in my mind, so we're on the same page, is I'm the guy in my organization. Nobody else does this.
Then he's the
how can I have user adoption and organizational adoption when I'm still in a viral phase? Like, to me, I have a solution that is using Power BI. There are other people I need to bring into the fold to start using this solution. And then I need to start doing things like getting executive sponsor. Like, to me, that's a progression. And where I want to be with you guys, at least, is an understanding of like, what is your view on when Power BI gets into an org? And it could be any size. I'd say maybe this is a smallish size company, right?
Okay, yep.
Because
sure,
like an org that's medium or big may just be like, we're doing Power BI. And you don't need the viral, but so many of the questions that we get from users are, I'm only on a small team, or I'm the guy, or where do I fit, or how do I move through this adoption roadmap to get a solution for data culture and these bigger things within an org.
So Melissa asks a question here, and I'm going to answer her question and I think your question at the same time by saying this. She goes, question for you guys: do you like the 3 categories rather than lumping them all together and just calling it general user adoption? And I think what I would want to lean on is, when I look at the diagram, organizational, user, and solution, there are interrelated perspectives of how you can view the world of adoption, right? So if I'm an IT leader, if I'm coming purely from IT, I'm the guy who manages the SQL database. I am that team, right? That is more of a top-down organizational lens on how they might see adoption occurring. The same perspective inside the organization is, I'm the business user working in sales and marketing, and I need to go access that database from the user side, right? He's going to have a different perspective, and there's this like a user based, right? I'm going to download desktop. my company allows me to download it. I'm going to start there, and I'm going to kind of look at how I do that. And there's a culture piece, right? I'm learning it, and I'm going to go over to my other coworker, and I'm going to build a report and share it with Tommy. And Tommy's going to be like, oh, that's interesting. That added a little bit of value to me. And that might be a very microcosm version of like what's going on there, but someone took initiative, and that person might have taken initiative down in the business unit level. And then there's a final solution here is like this is solution adoption. And I think that's also a relevant topic here because that's where we're talking like, let's build an app and push an app to the organization. And then people are interacting with the Power BI surface area less around building reports, but more around just consuming content. So I think the perspectives are right. I think there are three. I mean, I think I agree with the lenses that are there. And I think depending on where you are in the organization, these lenses will apply to you, and they're all kind of interrelated. So that
I agree. I like the three. If for nothing else, just to argue with you. But like what you described to me is just different initiating phases of this around your solution or user adoption. Like just because you're in IT, your reach might be larger because you're sharing with more people versus I'm in a particular business unit. But to me, you've just built a solution using Power BI. That's not like that's an initiating step to get to a whole bunch of other stuff we need to talk about related to a lot of these other roadmap pieces, which are big organizational pieces in my mind.
So I think reading the descriptions again maybe aligns a bit better with what I'm talking about because organizational adoption talks about governance and data governance and aligning your data to organizational practices. So that's another topic. I mean, you can roll out Power BI in a team, a solution in a team, and it could just be just fine. You can roll out a Power BI report internal to 2 or 3 people or on a user level. I just use it as a user, and I don't ever share anything. So I definitely think there's like these adoption levels. I think they're relevant topics. I like where they're broken out, and I really like the description of 1, 2, 3. But I think they're all happening at the same time at different levels inside an organization.
No, I mean not off the start. So if you're gonna, I mean, you could be like a 200, a 300, and a 100 somewhere, right?
Wait, hold on. We'll pause right there. If you're gonna go talk about maturity levels, let's quickly talk about those. So if you're gonna bring in the numbers,
that's shifting topic.
Yeah, I don't want to shift.
So, and that's fine. And that's fine. It's fine. So I just want to clarify for audience, right?
Yes.
We're gonna move from this 3-level diagram of different adoption, right, into how do I set the where am I overall holistically in the adoption roadmap, right?
Yes.
And that's the maturity level.
Yeah. So I might have put a list generate out there without knowing it, but
I don't even know where
did we cover enough? So do we feel like I feel like we're going to be a point where we're going to slightly disagree. We're going to agree to disagree on like the organizational adoption, user and solution adoptions. I think would we all agree that this all is happening with inside organizations? Like, would we agree like these are the terms are right?
So, well, I think we're all agreeing that they all need to happen. I think whether they're all happening or progressing is very different.
No, agree with that.
Would you say? Let me ask: do you think you can grow in one of these areas and not the others at a significant rate?
Absolutely.
I think it's like weightlifting. I think you could work out your arms all the time and always skip leg day, and you get imbalanced, and you eventually figure out I'm imbalanced, and now I need to do leg day and add that in, or other things.
I'm an org. I'm an org that lets any BI tool be used. I can build a Power BI solution and be at a maturity level of 100 because our specific area utilizes and continues to grow Power BI significantly, but you're not going anywhere as far as a wider organizational adoption of Power BI. So I would say you could go real deep in these particular areas.
So you're saying you could be like an efficient organizational adoption but no user adoption and minimal solution adoption. Is that what you're saying? No. I'm saying, can you grow in one?
Are we talking about Power BI specifically or business intelligence and any tools?
Let me check the name of the podcast. Yes. So I'm gonna, for the sake of the argument, I'm saying if you're gonna adopt Power BI, can you have incredibly high increasing rate of return on user adoption, and the other two not adopting at all or staying stagnant, or even worse, which can happen. I think no one has talked about this, go backwards.
Yeah, which is why there's maturity levels, which is what we're going to talk about. If you want to reach the next level of maturity,
yes,
and bring in these different pieces of the roadmap, this is exactly what that describes to me. Is like, where are you at as an organization? Am I stuck completely in Tommy's the only one using Power BI, but he's doing it really effectively and everybody loves it, and nobody else is adopting it, and no, we're not going to build any teams around it, and no, we're not going to build any strategy? Yes.
Yeah. So I agree that they can grow at different rates. I'm not saying that like one will always grow, like that they all have to grow at the same rate together. I'm not saying that. Okay. I'm saying, can one grow and the other's not at all?
Yeah.
Like,
yes.
Over progress. So that I couldn't,
but only to a point.
28.
The answer, I think the answer is yes.
To a point. Okay.
Yes, but only to a point, because I think at some point in time you run into a problem. Particularly, I'm going to throw data governance under the bus here on this one, because I think this is a really under talked about topic and one that needs to be addressed more often. Went into a client, they had a team building Power BI reports. Somehow, numbers were shared with financial information of everyone's salary to the entire organization.
Win.
Okay. So everything, like, adoption was growing, people were using it, things were getting better, right? And all of a sudden, someone goes into a report and goes, "What's that report?" and clicks on the report and goes, "Oh, I can see what Seth makes for yearly salaries." Someone did a boo-boo, and governance.
Someone did a boo-boo, yeah.
And so there, what happened right that? What happens at this case, right? You get to a point, and then you hit a point where, okay, we've made it to a level, and something has happened, and we've caused a rubber band effect, and we have to snap back. And so what the instant reaction is, whoa, put on the brakes here. We didn't know this was possible, or people didn't understand the framework. I'm going to say framework this time. People didn't understand the Power BI framework well enough to understand what they were doing. And so then what happens at that point in time, we take this really big step back. We shut off everything as much as we can, delete all the things. We can get back
lock it down, like we're going to pretend we don't have Excel.
Exactly. Go back to Excel and sharing things in Excel. But because there wasn't thought of that. So I think, and that to me, right, now you're talking higher levels of data governance. You're going to have these deeper conversations. There's going to be a process put in place to do more things around governance of the data. So I think that's what I see happening there. But Tommy, also too, I would say, if Tommy left his organization right now, your company would step back a level. So I think also it's very dependent on the people and strategic members you have on your team.
Yeah.
Because as team members move on to other things potentially, that can also influence your maturity levels. And I think one sign of your maturity level should be how well can you maintain your process and your BI solution without relying on individual people to keep it going. And so that's a sign, that would be an indicator of a good process or a good BI rollout, because it lives on when those key leaders or key builders move on.
You're right, because that farm in Sicily is happening soon. But I know, but I think it's for any Power BI pro who is, the forefront. There's always a forefront and a leader at each company. And you could say that's the same for any company. But so your analogy though is different from arm day and leg day, where you could just beef up on the arms.
But to a point,
shouldn't do that because there's nothing. But
but to a point, though, right? I mean, you could be
you could literally be Hulk Hogan on top and
skinny runner on the bottom.
Yeah, skinny runner on the bottom.
You could.
What you're saying is there's a limit. Getting started, man. But like what you're saying, you said just now about there's a limit to how much you can grow in one of the adoption areas. That's what I'm trying to say is you can only progress so far in one of those areas without the others needing to come from behind or having to drag the others.
And so help me out, right? I'm a user. I've built a solution in Power BI, and people in my org love it.
Okay.
There's some additional users that start getting added, but nobody in any management level or the executive chain is interested in sponsoring or pushing adoption of Power BI. Does that kill the solution or the small user adoption of Power BI, Tommy?
It's funny.
Or is that okay to independently grow within the company and not get any larger? Because my argument would be yes. You could definitely have those two areas grow and flourish, and it will never go any larger because nobody else wants to push it up. So your maturity level is always going to stay at 100.
I actually love that we have a differing opinion. You said what you just said now about could one grow if, let's say, there's a stop from there's no organizational buy-in. When I've been diving into all the amazing documentation, I took some of the show me one of the levels of maturity and the bullet points of this is what level 100 or 200 looks like.
Sure.
I looked at that and I highlighted ones that I called time bombs, that if those failed, it would literally kill that level and revert it. And to me,
Why?
because eventually there's going to be a breaking point. So let's say you had the great user. Take the example you just had.
This is exactly what Melissa's saying. Melissa's saying right now, there's a book from Laura Madsen. I think it's what it's called, Disrupting Data Governance.
The previous part.
But she's saying one thing it talks about is what do we do when something goes wrong? Because it will, and having a plan to help people avoid overreactions that's good.
See, I'm saying two things. I'm saying not necessarily if it goes wrong, but if it never happens, right? So let's say you never get that organizational buy-in. Eventually with that user, because you don't have this org structure, you don't have the buy-in, so there's no incentive to use it. So eventually there's going to be some behavior that changes where Power BI is not the solution because something else goes on. There's no structure to say we need to keep doing Power BI, especially when eventually, I guess it would, eventually something will happen if you have this, I hate saying willy-nilly, but you have this unstructured way of processing the data and processing the KPIs. Eventually the data is going to be wrong at some point. That happens in any structured organization anyways.
Well, and it's a matter of how much trust you want to lose, right?
Right. And once, eventually you're going to lose that trust. And if there's no no net at the bottom, then there will be another solution to look for.
Mm-hmm.
And not saying it's always going to occur that way, but I think you're just increasing your chances of reverting if you don't get the buy-in at some point. There are certain things that as you build up, you need to build nets under, or you need to make sure you just can't. It's like an icy mountain. It's some of these characteristics. You're either climbing up. If you stay still, you're going to slide down. And I think eventually that will happen.
I'm in 100% agreement, right? And if we're talking about specifically Power BI throughout an organization, right? So do I think you can have a solution user, levels without the organizational adoption? Yes. But to your point, I do agree that there's probably a limit on that, right? Because it unless you're in a super large org where there is organizational adoption and there is a COE and there is, other frameworks of governance and support that support multiple BI tools, because you can have those things with multiple BI tools. You're just increasing the cost of supporting all of those. At some point in time, I would agree, it's probably feasible one of the tools is going to lose out and they're going to centralize around one.
Yep.
So I agree with you. To bring this back into a different way and maybe alter the statement, I think it is important for that person or that small team to engage in these different levels of adoption as soon and as early as possible. Because if you don't have, if you're building a fantastic solution in Power BI and there's another tool somebody else is using, we'll use a loser. I'm not going to throw out names, but you're pushing to the next level of adoption is really important, right? So I agree. Attacking all three at the same time is very valuable in a pursuit of making Power BI the de facto BI tool, because you need to get that upper level buy-in manager and then somebody else, and then whoever holds the purse strings that can start to say, yeah, this is a very good direction. We can save a lot of money doing this. We can streamline a lot of our processes. We can, et cetera, et cetera.
Yeah. And I love that, because I think there's just the dependencies on each facet. Seth, you and I offline, we're talking about bikes. Like I can only go so fast depending on the bike that I have and how much I'm practicing. Those are interdependent. Like I can improve my speed if I had a crummy bike, but there's only going to be a limit how as fast as I go, compared to if I also had a really fast bike, but I practice less, something's going to give. If I want to increase my speed, I need to continually, I either need to improve my bike specs and I need to practice at the same time.
Or get an engine.
One of those fit, or get an engine. Yeah.
And Matthew Roach said it really well. He made a tweet. He goes, an executive sponsor is like cheat codes. You can get to the same destination, but it gets you there much faster.
Yeah.
And I was like, wow, that's a really good phrase. I liked that. I thought that was a really good phrase. Same thing, right? Tommy, you can ride 100 miles on your bike, or you can go get a motorcycle.
Yeah,
I'd rather have a motorcycle.
Is the idea to get there faster?
So you're saying but okay, by what you just said, then you're saying you could still get there without an executive sponsor.
Probably.
No.
Probably won't be as elegant.
No, you can't.
No, you can't.
It's cheat codes.
Not a chance.
No, you can't.
It's not a cheat code. You didn't even put the game in the dang console.
At some point in time, the bubble
That's
up
how you
approach.
lost your game.
At some point in time, so you don't have to have an exec. I mean, it works very well in your favor when you have an executive sponsor to push this thing, because there are roadblocks you're going to face that it will stagnate you will never get to a certain maturity level without it. You will not, because there are certain roadblocks that you will have that you cannot remove without executive level sponsors. Can you roll out Power BI, and can a company use Power BI without an executive sponsor? Most certainly.
Sure, but that falls into what I was just describing as far as like you're stuck in one of those levels.
Yeah,
agreed.
And I think it will revert
I agree with that.
eventually.
I think that's fine.
I think you'll have, if you don't have the executive sponsor, it's just a matter of time until it all breaks down. To me, it's just a matter of time. It could be a year or 2 years.
I don't think it would break down. I think it just kind of doesn't go anywhere.
If you have no executive sponsor at all in an organization,
it could go the opposite direction, right? Like
you think
an org at some point, depending on size, and this is where I fall apart. Like I've never been a part of an org that's like 20, 30, 40, 50, 60,000 people.
Sure.
Right. I don't know what, I'm sure they support everything. Like, well, in that organization, was there anybody saying like, you can't use Power BI, Mike?
No, but it wasn't, you can't use Tableau either. Right. And so there are executive level sponsor pieces. So this is where I take a lot of this approach, right? When you get into larger organizations, there's a lot of things that can change, right? So Tommy, you say if you don't have an executive level sponsor, you may have an executive who just flat out refuses, like Tableau is the way. We're gonna go that way. That's what we're gonna adopt.
Right.
If you're not blocked, you could still use Power BI, but organizations are organic. People leave, people come, people go. Yep. And so what happens is if you stay long enough, right? Something will happen, and potentially someone will move. If the friction is too much for someone, you find either the talent will leave and you'll go to an organization that does adhere to your ideals on how you're doing things. So I know another guy who's working for companies. He worked for a company that they were just stuck. They were going to go only so far with Power BI, and he said, "I think this is the way. You guys are still doing everything in Excel. I'm doing everything in Power BI," and he was the lone wolf. He was pushing it. There was no executive sponsor. So and again, that organization may get there eventually, but it's changing. He left the company and went to a different company now and found another company that is more pro Power BI because they have that executive level sponsorship. They're stuck at a level 100 until they understand what's going on. Either their executive sponsor kicks in and gets going, or they're just going to stay at this. We only have 3 or 4 Power BI reports. There's only a couple pro licenses. Or we're just going to make Power BI reports and email them around. Heaven forbid that happens. But like
salary reports,
who knows, right? But they're going to get stuck in that level and they'll never get any further. And that's where I think Matthew Roach's comment came from, is like, okay, I'm not saying you don't need one ever, but I'm saying like you maybe have limited yourself if you don't engage with some of these steps.
See, to me, I'm always going to say it's a prerequisite from an origin to increasing, because of the fact that at some point, without the executive sponsor, it's not just someone to support it, but someone to protect it.
You're too idealist, Tommy. You need to live in the real world.
Listen, I am a realistic pessimist. Okay, so
as much as I would love to have executive sponsors everywhere, everyone's time is like going to be pulled a million different directions.
You can still,
you maybe get it and you maybe don't.
You can still do things, but I'm saying you're just setting yourself up for a instance where someone comes in to be an executive sponsor for another tool, or another strategy. Because what you said about the Tableau and Power BI, well, you just can't wait for someone to come in because it's an investment. This is not like your boss changes and now instead of Fish Fridays, you're doing Pizza Fridays. There's a large investment someone did into Tableau with people who are experts in Tableau, to the dollars spent in Tableau, where if that person leaves and the next guy is Power BI, you're gonna have to wait a long time for that rollout to begin. And then you have to go through people using another BI tool. A lot of our instances
Not talking about
are
tools.
people who don't.
And not talking about tools or timelines. I'm just saying, like, in general,
still happens too.
Yeah, I think this stuff happens though. I think this stuff still happens. I think I think companies hire Tableau people and they beef up on this technology stack, and at some point either those people kind of move on. They either hire more people to continue supporting that tool that they've chosen on, or other more there's a large learning curve to Qlik and Tableau. There just is. It's just different than how things are run previously. Right. So I think there is a barrier to entry to other tools, and so I think what you see here is you see those tools getting. I'm very Power BI centric, anyways. Yeah. I'm seeing those types of tools removing themselves from organizations because they're finding that the friction to use Power BI and the price point of Power BI is much lower than these other tools, and so companies are finding value, and therefore I think companies are organic, and they will walk towards what is most efficient and value added to the company. And I think if you are a good company and will continue to grow, that will be a direction that you will move in. If you're a dumb company, you will shrink and you will make bad decisions and you'll spend money where you shouldn't be.
Today we talk about dumb companies.
I don't see that in the levels, but let me see.
That's level 0.
Yeah. It's interesting you say that the cheat code thing I do agree with, but I think what I can't get over is in the absence of a sponsor, how does that look? So I'll give an example at our organization. When we were really beginning to roll out Power BI, we showcased like one of the gold data sets, we called it version 2 of reporting to the sales organization. And we had executive sponsorship from both from the top and then the head of sales. And after the call, the head of sales who loved Power BI said, okay, guys, all right, everybody, this is what we're using moving forward. If you want your numbers, look here.
Agreed.
So, that's definitely a cheat code, but in my head, I can't help think, okay, what if that person wasn't there, right? That sponsor wasn't there. They have no incentive to use that because they could just continue they can still use version 1, what they're used to. So in the absence of it, it's not just a cheat code. It's basically your controller in so many ways.
So I think we're really touching on.
I don't think that's idealist, but
no,
maybe it is.
You're talking to maturity levels that are much higher than the initial levels. So maybe now would be a good transition point. I know we're at time. We're basically about an hour right now. So maybe we just kind of quickly touch on the maturity levels because we're going to have to revisit this topic again. Really good topic. I think there's a lot of ideas that we're bashing around here that are just awesome, but let's just maybe touch on the quick maturity levels.
Actually, do you want to make a different suggestion?
Yeah, sure.
I think to your point, we have touched on, kind of maturity level 1,
okay,
pockets or the adoption kind of stuff.
Agreed.
So next time we revisit, the adoption roadmap, which we will, right? Like maybe we dive into the other area, data culture and executive sponsorship, which will then allow us to talk about the next levels of maturity.
Yeah.
I think it would be
unless you want to consolidate and do it in 2 minutes.
No.
I'll be quiet.
Listen,
I'll be quiet.
I have a little more time. I'm happy to. Okay.
Let's just define the buckets first, and then we'll let people get to the links of them. And so I'll just drop the link in the YouTube chat just real quick. So here's the link. And then these are the different levels we're talking about. And so there's just define what there's level 100, which is kind of like your initial level. You're just starting things. There's some pockets of success, maybe not wide adoption. Level maturity 200, repeatable. It's repeatable and managed. You're beginning to walk up that maturity curve. Data management is planned or is being executed at some level, right? And then you're starting to look at what defined processes look like. How do we do things? You're starting to figure out what that is, write it down so you can start doing this, but maybe it's not 100% uniform across your organization. There might be different pockets doing different things. That makes sense. Then you have level.
So before you move on though, there's 2 key points to that.
Yep.
That is a huge ramp up from 100 to 200,
Okay.
which is initial planning
Yep.
of governance and strategy, as well as a recognition for a COE, and those are organizational level.
It's in it. Yep, agreed. Yep, but again, it's a path. So yeah, I definitely
Yep.
agree. You're not seeing that in level 100, correct? Yep. Then level 300 would be define levels. We are setting standard data management processes. We are establishing a consistently applied across organization boundaries. So we would think the pockets of the company are now starting to align with what they're doing together. And I think, Tommy, what you were talking about here just a moment ago was maturity level 400 capable, right? This is your well-defined, you have data is well managed in its entire life cycle. So Tommy's team is saying, we are going to stand behind this data. We've put money and dollars behind this. This is our data set. If you want sales number, we will work hard to make sure that this report, this data is what everyone looks at. And I think that's what I think you were talking to, is that 400 capability.
To be honest, as I looked at this, I would say it's an interesting case of almost you're transitioning from 2 to 3.
Okay.
Like it's a transition part, but yeah, for the sake of.
Yep. And then I would push you more to 400 because you need to have well-defined stakeholders, because in order for you to make that kind of command decision, you need a stakeholder to be like put in place, which that is clearly a 300 level, I think, hurdle you got to hit. And and then there's level 500, efficient, right? And I think this is where you want to strive to get to this one, right? There is automation and there's continuous improvement. We're doing things, it's adding value, and now we're refining and cleaning and we're building we're taking the waste, the virtuous waste out of, to talk to our earlier podcast, we're taking the virtuous waste out of our process and making it better. So I think these are very, very amazing. Like these levels, I think, are very well defined. I think there's very clear areas where you could literally go through the checklist and kind of look at these key points and say, oh, I feel like we're here. And then you can look ahead to the next level and say, what should we be doing to get to this next level? Like, when do I start planning governance? Well, that's at level maturity 200. Like, we got to start talking about this. We need a strategy. Let's start figuring that thing out. And that's why I think the top diagram at the top, right? It's not 3 different things, right? It's a lot of different things, right? A lot of user adoption may be happening at level 100. You're starting to talk about incorporating the organizational adoption in level 200, 300, and maybe there's some solution adoption kind of spread across those 200 to 300 level areas, right? So I think it's all kind of interrelated, their perspectives. I don't know, anyway, that's where I perceive it. It's really good. This is really good.
No, I want to say just one thing too, that print it out. I've been writing, seriously, I'm not even
talking
kidding.
about old archaic processes.
Yeah, exactly. I printed out and I even sectioned them too. So this is 2, and I got each one. Because
can you find keyword siloed? Hold, please.
Keyword
PDF.
I know. As I'm printing 100 pages, I'm going, this feels, process.
Kill the trees, Tommy. Just kill them all.
I did it for 2 reasons: to kind of section it out a little better, but 2, I'm actually going to take this to my boss and I'm going to go, where are we on each one? And then how do we get there? Because Melissa did such a good job of saying, if you are a maturity level 300, here's a list of how you can tell.
Yep.
To kind of place yourself.
I like that. Yep.
And I know we didn't talk about where is the user, but I think you should be able to get a really good idea where you are from reading this.
And that's the same thing the skill matrix does that Seth wrote.
Yeah.
Seth wrote the skills matrix because there are levels of maturity that you're doing, and you can give yourself a score in these different levels based on where people who've done this stuff before and feel like this is the breadth of knowledge that you could have in this area. Here's where you might fit in some of that perspective. You have to have people who've done it, who've been there, who've gotten through the hard parts to be able to evaluate and say, here's what I think the scale looks like. And I think in this world of like Power BI keep making new features and things, the scale is probably always moving and it's probably always adjusting. This thing will probably have to be updated every couple of years because there's so many more new things that are a part of this. Anyways, really good topic.
What other podcast gives you measurable scale for yourself and your company? Man,
this podcast was worth the price of admission alone.
Exactly.
All right, Tommy, give us the wrap. We're way over time. We got to get back to like real things here. So, Tommy, where can you find the podcast?
So you can find the podcast anywhere it's available. If you like it, subscribe to it on your favorite platform. Give a review or rating. We do live streams every Tuesday and Thursday, 7:30 a.m. Central. So if you want to join the conversation, we have a playlist of all the videos and upcoming ones. So you can hit the little bell to say, hey, I want to be notified when the next podcast is live.
Yep.
And then also join the conversation anyway. We try to post on LinkedIn. We have a mailbag on the Power BI Tips website, and leave a comment too. And the thing that we ask the most, if you enjoy this podcast, say it to one other person.
Yeah, just share it to one other guy.
Share the word. We love having the forum with you guys.
Yeah.
We want to, we would love to see more people involved. We feel like, again, these are conversations I think we all have, around the water cooler. So spread the word.
Yeah, we're not trying to teach you DAX here. We're just trying to have candid conversations around how we've interacted with Power BI and how it rolls out. And we hope you find value. And if you're finding value, share the link with someone else that you think would also find value from the podcast. And we'll continue growing this and having good topics and having a lot of fun together as a community. Thank you all very much, Seth, Tommy. I really appreciate it. This has been really good. Great discussion. We'll see you next week on Tuesday.